Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to another video where today I'm going to be doing the big books tag. This tag was originally created by One Book One Review, and I also saw Beth from Beckle Books do this quite recently, so I'll leave both of their videos in the description down below if you wanted to check those out. The way that this tag works is that you pick 5 books or the 5 biggest books that you've read, and then you also talk about 2 big books that you would like to read. If you watched one of my most recent videos, then you'll know that big books kind of scare me. When I read them, I do actually enjoy them. It's just getting the motivation to start them. What I've actually found when it comes to big books is that if I listen to them as an audiobook or if I read them on my Kindle, then I find it a lot easier to get through them. I don't know whether it's just because it means that I can read another book alongside it, like a shorter book. And so I've started to do that more recently, and so far it seems to be working, which is great. So I'm going to start by talking about the biggest book that I think I've read this year, and that was Game of Thrones by J.R.R. Martin. Now, I read the physical copy of this book years ago. It must have been about 5 years ago, and I listened to the audiobook this year, like a few months ago, and I did enjoy it for the most part. I don't know when this audiobook was created, but because I've seen the TV show, I'm used to certain characters' names being pronounced in a certain way, and on the audiobook I noticed that the narrator pronounces certain names differently, and so it was a little bit distracting. Obviously that is nothing on the narrator, like that is just like a personal thing. I do want to continue with the series because I think a few years ago when I read it, I read the first 3 or 4 books, and I don't know whether to continue with the audiobooks or read the physical copies because I have got the 2nd and 3rd book as paperbacks, but yeah, it's not really a priority, so it might be something that I come back to next year. The next book series that I'm going to talk about is Outlander by Gabaldon. I don't actually know how many books there are in this series. I think there's a lot, and I'm pretty sure I've read the first 4. Yeah, I think I've read the first 4 because I think there's 5 series so far of the TV show. I got the 5th book out of the library before we went into lockdown, and so it sat on my shelf for what, like 4 or 5 months, and I kept looking at it and thinking I need to pick that up, but I just didn't get round to it. It scared me. I think it's like 900 or 1,000 pages. I think the main reason why I was able to get through the first 4 books in the series is because I spent a week in hospital last year and I downloaded them all onto my Kindle, and I mean, I didn't have anything else to do, so I just read solidly for like a week, and I did really enjoy them. I gave the first book 5 stars, and I think I gave the 2nd and 3rd book 4 stars, but then the 4th book I think I only gave 3 stars, and because it's such a huge book, that is one of my pet hates, where you get to the end of an 800 or 900 page book and it only feels like a 3 stars. And so even though I didn't dislike it, I did enjoy the journey. And one of my main issues with the 4th book is that there's a lot of miscommunication, and it's such a huge part of the plot that it just annoyed me, and I couldn't give it more than 3 stars. I do think I'll eventually get around to finishing the series, but for now it's just not a huge priority. Another absolutely huge series that I read about 10 years ago is the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. So this is book 1, which as you can see is actually less than 250 pages. However, as you go through the series, they get more and more dense. This is book 5, which is Wolves of the Calla, and I mean, look at that beast. Like, they're beautiful. I really love the covers on these, but they are intense, and it took me a good few years to get through them all. I actually read the first book in the series and I didn't like it that much. It wasn't until I got to the 2nd book, The Drawing of the Three, where I actually started to get invested in the characters and invested in this journey. If you don't know what this book is about, it basically follows a guy called Roland Deschain, I hope I've pronounced his name right, who is a gunslinger, and he's on this journey, this quest to the Dark Tower, which is at the centre of the world. This is, I guess, a dark fantasy, like an epic adult fantasy. And what's really interesting is that sometimes you'll come across characters from some of Stephen King's other books. I'm pretty sure it took him about 20 years to finish the series. Even though this is one of my all-time favourite series, I do struggle to recommend it because it's so different to Stephen King's other books, and if you've not read anything by Stephen King before, I think there are other options that are more representative of what his books are about. However, if you do like dark adult fantasy and you've got time and you're willing to commit, then I love these books. The next book series that I'm going to talk about, and I wasn't sure whether to count this, but it is The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, and as you can see, I've got all 3 books here as like standalone novels. But when I first read this book, or these books, I read them as an all-in-one volume. It was a copy that my dad had, and I can remember it was green and it had Gandalf on the cover, and it was intense. I actually found it really difficult to get through because the book was so heavy. This is another epic fantasy adventure, and I'm sure that most people know what Lord of the Rings is about. It's been turned into a very popular TV show, a very popular movie trilogy, and I'm actually planning to reread these for the rest of the year. If you haven't heard me talking about TolkienAlong before, it's a 4-month-long read-along hosted by Beth, Ashleigh and Lauren. I'll leave all the details in the description, but we're essentially reading a different Lord of the Rings or Tolkien book every single month from September to December. So we read The Hobbit last month, and then we're going to move on to The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and Return of the King. Have I got all of those right? Each of these books individually aren't actually that bad. I think they're about 400 to 450 pages. However, if you were to read them all in one go, it's like 1,000 or 1,100 pages. So yeah, pretty big. Finally, I'm just going to mention the biggest book that I've read so far this year, and that was A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. Maas. So this is the third book in the A Court of Thorns and Roses trilogy, which I've talked about a few times on my channel. I read all 3 books within the space of a week back in August, and it's basically an adult fantasy romance which follows a girl called Feyre who accidentally kills a fairy, and she is sent to live in this fairy kingdom where she learns all about their different internal politics. I'm not explaining that very well, but I do have a whole video all about A Court of Thorns and Roses that I made right when I first started this channel, so I'll leave that linked up here and in the description if you want to check that out. What's really interesting about this book is that even though it's around 700 pages, it didn't feel like 700 pages. I don't know whether it's just because it was the third book in a series, and so I was already invested in the story and invested in the characters. I know that a lot of people have some really strong opinions on Sarah J. Maas's books, and I didn't enjoy A Court of Rings and Ruin as much as I did the second book in the series, A Court of Mist and Fury. However, I did like it. I didn't think it was perfect, and there was some stuff in there that made me go. But I am interested in reading the next book in the series, which comes out in January or February. So yeah. So in this next section, I'm going to talk about 2 big books that are currently on my TBR that I would like to read at some point. And the first book is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. And I don't actually know a lot about this book. I think it's about a dragon, but I know that a lot of people rave about Samantha Shannon's writing. And I know that a lot of people enjoyed The Bone Season, which is by the same author. I think it's set in this world where there's this prophecy that the queen has to have a daughter. And I think if she doesn't, then something really terrible is going to happen. I'm really bad at explaining books that I've not read, if you haven't noticed. But I have seen so many people say that this is one of their favourite fantasy books that I've read this year. So yeah, hopefully I'll get around to that at some point. Another big book that's on my list is I Am Pilgrim by Terry Hayes, and I picked this up for 99p on Kindle. I think I saw the deal mentioned in this book club, and I saw loads of people saying that it's one of their favourite books. And because I read a lot of thrillers and I enjoy thrillers, I thought, yeah, that sounds great, I'll pick that up. Didn't realise how big it was. It's actually nearly 900 pages long, but because I've got it on my Kindle, and I think I mentioned earlier, I do find it a lot easier to read big books on my Kindle. So hopefully I'll get around to it at some point, and hopefully I'll enjoy it. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the video. If you've read any of the books that I mentioned, then please do leave me a comment down below. Let me know if there's any big books that are on your TBR that you'd like to read. And yeah, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Click subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!